Test 9, all-terrain tires.
All-terrain tires. It's a big test because it's a big category.
Yes, it is.
All-terrain is kind of a broad generic term used to describe tires that have more off-road capability than highway all-season touring tires, but not to the level of off-road max traction tires, which is what people would commonly call mud tires.
Yeah, it's a big, diverse category that we've actually just recently segmented into a few smaller subcategories that kind of addresses market trends and some tires we've seen lately from manufacturers.
Yeah, definitely. And because of that, we actually have 3 categories as we define them in this test. The first is on-road all-terrain.
Yep.
Like the name says, they're focused more on on-road capability, ride quality, noise, comfort, that sort of thing, but they also can deliver off-road traction when you need it.
Absolutely. Next up is the off-road all-terrain category, kind of the spiritual successor to the traditional all-terrain tire. They kind of have to balance that on-road comfort with a little more kind of off-road capability.
Yes, and then there's rugged all-terrain, or RT tires. This is an emerging trend we're seeing. There are a lot of products out there right now and coming that are going to kind of fit in this category. And these tires, they ramp up the aggressive aesthetics to somewhere between off-road all-terrain and off-road max traction. But that improvement or increase in appearance doesn't necessarily guarantee an increase in off-road traction.
Exactly.
But they can guarantee they'll look the part while you're doing it.
They certainly do. On top of all that, we have another wrinkle. We're testing light truck tires against their non-LT counterparts. We have 4 in this test. The first one comes in the on-road all-terrain category. That's the Yokohama Geolandar AT4.
Yes.
The other 3 are in the off-road all-terrain category. The BF Goodrich All-Terrain TA-KO3, the Cooper Discover Stronghold AT, and the Nitto Recon Grappler AT.
Yes, and LT tires, they have more robust construction than their non-LT counterparts. They're designed to handle higher inflation pressures. They have higher load carrying capacity in the same size when they're used on a high center of gravity vehicle like a pickup truck. The compounds that they use, they're generally geared more towards cut and chip resistance and durability and
heavier duty use.
Yeah, absolutely, like when you're towing or when you're fully loaded.
Right.
But even so, the tires in this test that are LT, they're only available in LT in our size.
They are the choice for that tire.
Absolutely. So if people are cross-shopping them, that's what it's going to be. So we had to include them to see how they stack up.
Yeah. Tire design is all about trade-offs. We keep saying it. People are probably tired of hearing it.
Right.
But we constantly see that give and take from design constraints. With these all-terrain tires, one of the traditional and seemingly unavoidable trade-offs for that increase in traction on loose terrain can be a decrease in ride comfort, an increase in noise, and a decrease in kind of light road handling.
Right, and since it's a huge component of all of our testing, the on-road performance of each tire is going to be a big differentiator, not just between the individual all-terrain categories, but all the individual products in this test.
Right.
And that's not to say that a tire that's, not good on the road is going to have great off-road traction, but big missteps in on-road refinement could indicate a focus on other attributes.
Yeah, good.
This is the Bridgestone Dueler AT Ascent. So far, it feels actually pretty good for the category.
It does, yeah.
There is definitely some firmness to the ride. When we say it's good for the category, it's still not highway all-season tire refined, but it's not that far off.
It's not far off,
right?
Absolutely not,
Right,
yeah.
And for noise, the volume isn't terrible. It's not
consistent.
Incredibly distinctive, right? Yep. And so it's fine.
But you can kind of feel, hey, this isn't a highway tire. You can kind of hear, almost kind of feel some of those little kind of mild tread blocks interacting with the surface.
Definitely.
But it's not bad. It's consistent. It's what an on-road experience should be for an on-road all-terrain tire.
Certainly. At highway speeds, it felt quite responsive. Actually had a little bit of like on-center heft. It took some effort to get it moving, which I liked. On the on-ramp though, I had to keep adding
lots of
input. It was like, oh my gosh, it's like it starts to turn and then it takes a set and all of a sudden you're not turning as much as you need to. So you add more and it takes a set and you add more. And I did not like that. This is the Cooper Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT.
The big bumps, very comfortable. You feel some of the undulations coming down, but it's an appropriate kind of feel. It's good.
Yeah, I'd say that given what some people expect from an all-terrain tire, it's more than just acceptable. It is.
It
like
does
you said,
the
it's
road
good.
plus trail. There's a reason it's not
road
the
comes
trail
first.
plus road.
Right, there it is. Bingo.
Probably.
Look at that. Noise comfort. Also nice. I got just a little bit of warbly sound again on the smooth surfaces.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I said some pitter patter in my notes. Steering, yeah, it was nice. It was similar to some of the others. It had some good responsiveness at speed, maybe even a little bit of on-center heft.
Yes, it's a truck. We're doing truck things. But, you know, I want it to turn when I give it a little bit of input. I want those small inputs to give me small changes out here on the highway.
Hankook Dynapro AT2 Extreme. Compared to the other on-road all-terrain tires, it's still pretty good in ride, but a little firmer, a little sharper on its responses, and I get more just like total up and down movement. One of the places that I really noticed it was here on the bypass. You know, that I wrote that in my notes, right? Yeah, they're more pronounced on this. Noise was another thing that, again, good, acceptable, still not a standout. You know, I noticed, I still do notice, you know, there are some distinct tones. There's kind of an upper and a lower sound profile here on the bypass. It doesn't do as nice a job blending tones.
Yeah, some of the better tires blended those into a consistent tone. This is now two tones that are kind of competing, and the overall volume is a little bit higher. I feel like I'm having to raise my voice a bit more talking to you.
Yep, more variety and more total volume. Yep. Oh, and then the steering. Let's talk about
it's a little vague for me everywhere. On ramp, off ramp, right here at 65 on the highway. I would like a little bit more. Is it bad? No. I want a little bit better response, a little less vagueness, a little less truck, a little more kind of on-road, more highway response. Nitto Terra Grappler G3.
Going over these, you know, small repetitive bumps that we have on this section, it feels just kind of jiggly or just lots of jittery movement, right? Over the big bumps, there is like this little bit of a spike or some large bumps kind of hit a little bit harder and sharper.
Its noise is
distinct,
leaving a little to be desired. Yeah, it's not as good. That's probably a step down.
Over all the different surfaces that we have, you know, on our route, it made different tones, and more than one. Usually there was a variety of tones, and they stood out. They were distinctive. The volume wasn't bad. It wasn't terrible. It was just you hear so many different things. Yeah, and then steering is pretty light and loose, vague. Not a whole lot of engagement. not a whole lot of action going on here. Yeah.
Fredestein Pinza AT.
It does a nice job of, you know, maintaining composure. It doesn't give us too much up and down. Nothing's too firm. So it's this nice blend of comfort and control on the road.
Noise as well.
Also quite good. It competes with some highway all season tires. Nothing that was super distinctive, nothing that was super high volume. Okay, so steering and on-road handling. Neither of us really had anything super profound to say about it. It just,
good?
Right. It just did what you wanted it to do. It doesn't make a spectacle of itself. It doesn't stand out in any way. It's just kind of pretty direct, reasonably well responsive, feels good, you know, driving straight ahead, has nice on-center, self-aligning torque. It was just good job.
Like you said, no bad habits, which is a win for even an on-road all-terrain. Yokohama Geolandar AT4.
This one is LT. There are a few of those in that test. It's firm.
It's firm. That final, again, the final peak of the impact is fairly kind of well-rounded over, so it's not terrible, but it's definitely firm.
I was not impressed with the noise on this tire. There's a wide variety of tones. There's significant volume. I think the best compliment that I could give it was that on the super smooth stuff, the overall underlying volume was loud enough that it masked some of the individual tones that were kind of just barely under there. And it's not like blow your eardrums out. Like, maybe I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but
it was unexpected. I put this noise was unexpected. I wasn't ready for this level of pattern noise or even just overall volume quite yet.
Right. The steering was kind of vague, responded fast enough, but just didn't have any real standout characteristics to it. This is the BF Goodrich All-Terrain TA KO3. All right, it's an LT tire, load range E, and it's composed, but it's firm. It doesn't have the kind of the big spike of some of the firmest tires in this test or stiffest tires in this test.
Right.
But it's up there just in terms
close.
of general, just, man, it doesn't want to conform to anything. It doesn't want to give or have any kind of cushion. It's just, man, it's trying to beat those those bumps into submission, and you know, it doesn't work, unfortunately. Volume, noise is pretty loud. There are multiple tones.
Yeah.
3 of them at least on the bypass here.
Yeah. My ear heard kind of a singular tone.
Okay.
But if you prefer just a light tone over more pitter-patter block noise, this may be a better choice.
Tell me about the steering. What do you think about the steering?
It's actually pretty good.
Right.
Again, relative to all-terrain tires, it's kind of sharp. It kind of responds. It's not bad.
Right. Okay, this is the Cooper Discoverer Stronghold AT.
Yep.
It's an off-road all-terrain tire, and it's LT.
Right.
And it's stiff.
It is.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Shocker.
Yeah, it's quite firm. The stiffness is up a level even compared to its other off-road all-terrain tires. We had a little bit of debate between the two of us. You feel all kinds of motion.
Yeah.
Brent thinks it's because the tire is jiggly. I think it's because the tire is so stiff that it's actually the structure of the truck or the suspension of the truck shaking.
What the cause is, up for debate.
Yep.
The result is some jiggle.
Yep. And okay, moving on to noise. When you get to anything higher, especially highway speeds, it just gets ratcheted up a notch. It is to the point where it's intrusive.
Yep.
It is what I would call loud. It is distinct. There's a lot going on in noise. Anyway, but let's talk about steering. Steering is...
It's good.
Yeah, pretty thumbs up, right?
Yeah. It competes with its other, actually very well-scoring counterparts in the off-road all-terrain category. It's mostly responsive.
Yeah.
Like, it's all on the same scale, but for an all-terrain tire, well done.
Yeah, pretty good.
The Falcon Wildpeak AT4W. It's less pointed, less sharp, less stiff than the LT tires. It's kind of an obvious thing, hopefully, but that is the case.
But yeah, when, say comparing it to the on-road or some of the on-road all-terrain tires, you definitely feel more impacts. You feel more of what's going on down at the road. It doesn't round over or, mute out some of the little stuff. You just you feel everything. You feel more total up and down motion.
Yeah.
I agree. What do you think about noise?
Yeah, you get a lot of kind of the different tones, the different cyclical pattern notes. On this rougher, coarser asphalt, it kind of does a decent job trying to cover that up.
Blend it all.
It just has to do that with elevated noise, so that's not really a win in my book either.
Yeah, and steering, I would say, is maybe slightly above expectations.
Yeah.
It is reasonably responsive. It is reasonably direct. It doesn't feel like it requires, huge inputs before it, responds. It's not as nice as the best in the test, but it, it does a pretty good job.
Yeah. Nitto Recon Grappler AT.
It is an off-road all-terrain tire.
Right.
This is an LT tire.
Right.
And yet, man, it does a good job on the road. Overall, just as a complete package, it's one of the top tires on the road in this test.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's stiff though, right? I mean, it's firm.
It is firm, but it's got the right amount of control when you need it. It's got the right amount of compliance also when you need it.
Right.
Close attention was paid to its on-road performance, and I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Close attention was probably paid to its noise performance as well.
Yep.
I mean, it's an aggressive tread pattern. It is an off-road all-terrain tire. It looks the part, but it just does a nice job of keeping everything in check. There's some volume, there are some tones, but in general, it's just kind of a broad overall, just kind of fades into the background type noise.
It's a muted noise. It's very consistent.
I mean, the steering kind of completes the package as well. It's responsive. It's relatively crisp. I'll use that word again.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice, especially given that it's an all-terrain tire. Cooper Discoverer Rugged Trek. It's pretty firm.
It is.
Firm to stiff, I think is what I said. Yeah.
I think I said it's not quite LT firm, but it's closing in quickly.
Yes, it is.
Which probably isn't a good thing. It's not terrible, but you're right, it's a little rough.
Overall volume wasn't terrible. It was loud, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as bad as, say, one of the other tires that comes to mind. Just the variety of tones that this thing creates, though.
You know, they come and go. They kind of hit you from all sides, you know, depending on your speed or how much, you know, load you have in the steering. And it's just, it's...
Right, or road surface imperfections. It's just like it chose to interact with everything. Every variable you could possibly think of
I have a
created
noise for
a
that.
new
Let me
tone.
show you.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well
no,
done.
really. And it gets old quickly.
And steering. You know, you said something earlier that there wasn't a whole lot of differentiation in terms of steering in this test group, and you're right. And this is one of those that stood out just a little bit above the others. Not up to best in test, but...
certainly didn't fall to the, this
Right.
isn't very good. Yeah, it was better.
I agree. Goodyear Wrangler Duratrack RT. Rugged all-terrain tire. This is a Eurometric tire. It is not LT. What do you think about ride quality?
It's appropriate for category, I think, are the specific words that I came up with.
Right? It's expected.
Yeah.
Anyway, noise. I noticed this kind of consistent, hollow sounding kind of a whoosh that persisted across every surface that we drove on.
It's always there no matter what surface you're on.
Right.
It's always humming at you. It's not bad though. It's mostly consistent, but just the fact that it's just everywhere all the time.
Steering.
Similar ride. It's fine.
It is. It does.
Good.
It steers. It is unremarkable, which isn't a bad thing.
No.
Is it? You know,
especially not for rugged all-terrain tire.
right?
So road evaluations are done, and we're taking it up a notch. We're going to do some on-road traction testing.
Yep.
Now, most of these tires are going to spend a majority of their time on pavement, probably. Yes, they need to perform well in off-road situations to their intended ability, but traction, ultimate braking, ultimate lateral traction, those are important aspects to on-road safety.
Right. So we're going to put all of these tires through our normal round of testing. That's 60 to 0 mile an hour braking in the dry and the wet, lateral traction on the skid pad in the dry and the wet. Then we're going to put each one on the track to see what kind of differentiation they have in the wet, see how each tire, puts together the dynamic abilities that are needed for emergency avoidance maneuvers out there on the road.
Yeah, and then we're going to do it in the dry. We're going to put them through our emergency lane change procedure, where we'll put real aggressive steering, and we'll see maybe some bad habits out of some tires and some that maybe are able to pass the maneuver without any issues.
Right. Braking distances in the wet from 60 miles an hour were separated by almost 35 feet from the longest tires to the best in test Nitto TerraGrappler G3. The Nitto impressively stopped in 158 feet, which was nearly 10 feet shorter than the next closest Bridgestone Dueler AT Ascent and Cooper Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT. A solid group of tires got the truck stopped before the 180-foot mark, with the Discoverer Stronghold AT right at 180 feet and the all-terrain TAKO3 4 feet further. Chasing the rest of the group with what could be considered just marginal longitudinal grip, with stops right around 190 feet, were the Discoverer Rugged Trek, Wrangler Duratrack RT, and Recon Grappler AT. Around the skid pad, the Nitto TerraGrappler G3 maintained its lead in the wet by a couple hundredths of a G on the wet surface and a noticeable 3/100ths of a G in the standing water. Behind that, a group of capable competitors all pulled above 0.55 Gs and only lost a few hundredths on the flooded surface. Starting to realize some loss in traction in the standing water, as well as the damp skid pad, the lower half of the group struggled with keeping the truck online, where the others had little problem. Rounding out the group were the Wrangler Duratrack RT and Recon Grappler AT, which both took another significant step back in lateral traction in damp conditions and standing water.
Around the wet track, the TerraGrappler G3 put its superior grip to good use, even in the dynamic maneuvers, feeling sure-footed and drama-free. Even though the Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT was a rather large step behind the Nitto, it had forgiving tendencies at the limit, with capable grip for another satisfying experience. Subjective evaluations mostly continued to mirror lap times, with the previously mentioned group right below the frontrunners feeling skillful, with the objective results to prove it. Beyond that, the subjective scores and times started to decline into less satisfying territory. While safe understeer was usually the result of their traction loss, it was obvious they lacked the grip necessary to quickly correct their shortcomings. In the dry, we're also performing the emergency lane change maneuver alongside our usual lateral traction testing and 60 to 0 braking distances. We can get a good idea of a tire's capabilities with just lateral traction and braking, but the ELC helps give us an idea how a tire puts everything together through aggressive transitions with lots of dynamic forces. It's a real-life test for a real-world situation.
Through the emergency lane change, a few tires seem to succeed most of the time without much trouble. With responsive steering and predictable traction at the limit, the Road Plus Trail AT, TerraGrappler G3, Pinza AT, Wild Peak AT4W, and Discoverer Rugged Trek all passed most of their attempts. With good pass rates, but feeling not quite as locked down, the Dynapro AT2 Extreme, Recon Grappler AT, and Wrangler Duratrack RT passed around 3/4 of their runs. The Dueler AT Ascent and Discoverer Stronghold AT would get cleanly through the gates if every input was executed perfectly, but couldn't manage the quick changes in direction as well. The Geolander AT4 had its own method of dealing with the lane change and would immediately push into massive understeer, slowing the truck down enough to the point where it would eventually change direction. While it technically would make it, it felt less like maneuvering through the gates and more like uncontrolled plowing. The all-terrain TA-KO3 had decent steering response, but it too lacked the control to make the lane change, and was one of the only tires where we had to worry about rear-end engagement as well, and not in a positive or helpful manner.
Braking from 60 in the dry, the TerraGrappler G3 and Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT once again showed they had an advantage in objective grip. Essentially equal in braking and only slightly behind in lateral traction, a strong group of tires pulled 0.72 Gs and stopped under the 135-foot mark. Beyond that group, the drop in measured lateral grip was minimal, and braking distances managed to stay right around the 140 mark, which seemed appropriate for the group of all-terrain tires.
We found some significant differences in this
we did.
test, which was expected with the cross-category comparison, and of course with the LT tires thrown in the mix.
Right, but customers that are out there shopping for these products are going to be faced with the same choices.
Yep.
So hopefully now they've got a better idea of the pros and cons of each option, as opposed to, just taking a wild guess or hoping for the best.
Right.
With the mix of all terrain categories as well as load ranges, there was bound to be differences on the road. The Fredestein Pins AT and Cooper Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT delivered road manners well suited to their on-road focused all-terrain category. Nitto's off-road all-terrain Recon Grappler AT was a solid third, thanks to its crisp steering, competitive noise, and only a mild reduction in ride quality despite being one of the LT tires. The Dueler AT Ascent, Wild Peak AT4W, and Hankook Dynapro AT2 Extreme all maintained a balance of performance around our route as well. The all-terrain TA-KO3 was one of the best for steering, but started to show some compromise in noise, along with the TerraGrappler G3, Discoverer Rugged Trek, and Wrangler Duratrack RT. The Geolander AT4 and Discoverer Stronghold AT were two of our LT tires with lower ride scores, and combined with some additional road noise, rounded out the group on the road.
Some of the test group's largest differences revealed themselves in the wet. Not only was the Nitto TerraGrappler G3 a standout in objective traction, but subjectively it led by a healthy margin. Once again, right on its heels, the Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT was determined not to let it get out of its sight. The Pinza AT, Dueler AT Ascent, and Wild Peak AT4W all demonstrated good proficiency in the wet that's sure to satisfy. The Discoverer Rugged Trek, All-Terrain TA-KO3, and Discoverer Stronghold AT followed with slightly more modest wet performance. Finally, the Dynapro AT2 Extreme, Geolander AT4, Recon Grappler AT, and Wrangler Duratrack RT couldn't match the competition on the wet pavement. Once every subjective metric was considered, the Cooper Discoverer Road Plus Trail AT's steady performance in every discipline earned it the top spot. Following closely behind, the Vredestein Pinza AT found itself at or near the top in multiple categories, undoubtedly helped by its on-road focus. With excellent objective traction, Nitto's TerraGrappler G3 secured a third-place spot and truly impressed our team with its capable grip, whether wet or dry. The Dueler AT Ascent, Wild Peak AT4W, and Discoverer Rugged Trek stayed neck and neck throughout each individual test, so not surprisingly, they were grouped closely once everything was tallied. Falling to the back of the pack of the non-LT tires, the Dynapro AT2 Extreme never really excelled at any one metric and found itself well behind its other on-road all-terrain counterparts. The all-terrain TA-KO3, Recon Grappler AT, and Discoverer Stronghold AT may have fallen to the back half of the group, but their sturdier constructions, or perhaps more emphasis on off-road performance, might make it a worthwhile trade-off to many customers. The Wrangler Duratrack RT and Geolander AT4 have significant differences. One is an LT tire but on-road focused. One is rugged all-terrain but not LT. But regardless of their differences, they both couldn't quite make up for some deficiencies throughout our on-road focused series of tests. So that's what we found on the road, in the wet, and in the dry. But a lot of drivers have to deal with winter's challenging conditions too. And that can be true if you live in a mild climate, or even if winter's been kind of hit and miss in your area for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and tread design, depth, and compound are the three components to wintertime traction.
Right.
And this test has a variety of each of those things.
Yes, it does.
So we may see that helping or even hurting some competitors.
Right, so if ice and snow traction are high on your priority list, be sure to watch our winter test results in early 2025. Either way, until then, thanks for watching.